Welcome to the Your Next Move podcast. If you know a little bit about my background, I always say that I work with professionals who are age 18 who don't know what to do with their life in college, all the way through folks who are in their 60s who are looking to take all of their experiences to truly curate a career that they love before they retire. And for me, when I have looked at all of the gaps that happen, the biggest parts of someone's transition that prevent them from making that next move, many times it comes from not having an understanding of where they are and where they'd like to go. I've always said that I am not a fan of the please, baby, please movement of like, please just let me get this job. Let me get in there. Give me a chance and I will kill it. Like, no one, if we're very honest, wants to take a chance on someone in the workplace. Most of the time, we need to see something, and more than just a spark or a feeling, that we know you will be able to kill it in that role. And this really has to do with understanding what your gaps are. You need to understand your gaps in the workplace, the gaps in your skills, gaps in your experience in order to communicate that in interviews, communicate that to leaders who want to know your strengths and weaknesses, and to understand the change that needs to happen to get you from where you are to the next area of your career. So I've never broke down this concept before, but for many of my clients, I developed this thing called the career growth scale. And I put it into categories of where folks are in their career. What is their mindset and what are the growth opportunities? And I'd like to walk you through it today so you can really determine where you are. And at best, of course, I don't know exactly where you are, but I think that there may be some commonalities in the mindset and the growth opportunities that you may be experiencing, which can help you and lead you to understanding your own professional gaps. So let's get started. So the first part of the framework I call the people who are establishing. And when we think about the definition of establish, it means setting up or on a permanent basis. For most professionals, I would say this is someone who is 1 to 3 years in tenure in the workplace. So generally their current state, they're a recent graduate or a few years out of college. The mindset of these individuals, which is the hardest part, is, am I even doing this job thing right? I feel so overwhelmed and everything, I mean everything, is brand stinking new. The transition from college to the world of work is something that we don't really prepare folks for. When you think about your experience in the school system, right? You were in K through 12, in class every single day, taking tests, having homework. Then you go to college and all of a sudden the world is yours, right? It's free. You can do what you want, when you want, build your schedule, but there's still some structure. I always joke and say like the syllabus is your structure. The syllabus tells you what to do. You listen to the syllabus, therefore, you should be able to do well. But when you get into the world of work, you can take your skills, take your experiences, and apply it to anything. And depending on the company you're at, you may not even understand what does good look like? What does success look like? So your mindset is generally just, can someone tell me if I'm doing it right? Am I in the right place? Am I in the right job? Am I going to do this for the rest of my life? It's basically confusion. And this is in that establishing part because you are establishing who you are as a professional to hopefully set you up for where you want to be later. And when we're talking about opportunities, so your growth opportunities, here it's really learning how to have career conversations and building key relationships with peers and stakeholders. In this establishing area, when you are honestly right out of college, in your first few years as a professional, if we're honest here, you are the low man on the totem pole. If we're talking about hierarchy, you are in an entry-level role within an organization. When you are in an entry-level role in an organization, your goal is to execute tasks. That's what you are there for. There is a problem and there are tasks associated with it. Someone has most likely determined the job description, determined what the problem is in the organization, and developed a process that they'd like for you to follow. So for what you're supposed to do is when they set up the bowling pins, you need to knock them down. That's generally what most entry-level jobs are there for. So of course it's mastering whatever those tasks are, building the skills. But on the other side, it's how are you having career conversations so you can understand where you want to go? Do you like where you are? Are you happy? Do you want to grow in this arena, in this company, in this industry? Or are you going to do this for a year or so and you want to transition to something else because your experience isn't great? In the establishing area, this is all about figuring out who you are as a professional, what you are good at and making the relationships to help you make your next move after this. So if we move into the next level, I call this emerging. And when we think about emerging, the definition is becoming apparent or prominent, which I think makes a lot of sense here. Generally, you've been working for at least 2 to 5 years. So you're 2 to 5 years out of college, sometimes a little longer. And the mindset is, how do I begin to grow my career? I'm getting frustrated and generally feeling a little underappreciated and overlooked. So if you've been out of the workforce for a few years, out in the workforce for a few years, out of college, you're ready into the working grind, you know how things are going, you have your own routine, but you're learning that there needs to be a little bit more. Maybe you want to make more money. Maybe you want more responsibility. Maybe you're in a groove and you want to find out, how do I get on the executive leadership track? Or you want to make a larger career transition. In this area, you're no longer brand spanking new, but you're generally not senior enough to have enough autonomy. So it's easy to feel like the middle child in the workplace. And that's where feeling overlooked, undervalued, and unappreciated comes from. The opportunities in this area is to really define your career strategy that includes role mastery and mentorship inside and outside of the company. So when we think about before establishing, we talked about getting those relationships in order, right? I have a lot of content. We'll link one in the show notes about the types of relationships you need in the workplace. But hopefully you made great relationships with peers, with teachers, with mentors, sponsors, colleagues. So now it's time to leverage those relationships to create a career development strategy of where you really want to go. You're no longer a newbie. You're no longer low man on the totem pole. It is time to put some strategy so that you have a trajectory that you're excited about embarking upon, at least for the next 2 to 5 years after this. And role mastery is key here. When we think about navigating the world of work with ease and making more money, mastery, that is what people pay for. People pay for you to do something better than them. If we're very honest, they pay for you to do it better than anyone else, drive results, make things easy. And when they know that you can do that, that is where the money comes from. So your strategy needs to include, what are the skills in your arena that you need to master so that you can leverage them to make more money and have a career that you're proud about. So for me, when I think about this emerging area, this was really when I was working in admissions in my early days of career development. So you know a little bit about my story. When I graduated college, I worked in an office supply company doing some data entry. Hated it. Then I worked in financial services as a banker. Did that for a little bit. Didn't really love it. But when I hit my stride, it was probably right at that 2.5 year mark when I went back into higher education. And that was when I was like, ooh, I want to grow here. So when I got there, you know that I started in admissions and then I went to career development. That was my strategy of learning, okay, I want this environment. I like this industry. But then I had to create my plan of what is the role that would be in better alignment for me. And for me, that was career services. I didn't know that I would end up building a whole career life around personal and professional development. At that time, I knew that I loved interacting with students, but I wanted more time with them. Most people don't remember their admissions counselor. They remember the folks who are in college and student services who work with them longer. And I've always been passionate about helping people doing counseling and thinking about navigating the world of work, connecting to opportunities. So I was like, maybe career services is something that I can do. So that first job in career services, after being in higher ed for almost a year, that is where I was like, ooh, okay, now it is time to dig deep. That was when I got into the emerging. Next up, so we have establishing and emerging. Now we have elevating. And this, when we think of the word elevate, literally raising or lifting up into a higher position. You'll see there's a little bit of overlap here because how you navigate your career and the time span it takes you to make moves is different for everyone. So I say here, this is generally 4 to 10 years. And most people here, we think about your current state. I would say you may even have 4 to 7 years in the industry you want to grow in. So your mindset here is, I'm I finally feel like I have a skill set and I'm ready to maximize, but how do I get promoted? So this is where in the past one, you heard me talking emerging, where we had to talk about role mastery. So when you've mastered it, that's when you really know you're in the elevating area, because now you can lead others. You have more ideas. You have more strategy behind it. There's so many opportunities for you to use your knowledge and skills in a much greater way, because again, you're no longer executing tasks, just simply knocking them off, checking them off your list like we are in establishing. You know what you want because you're out of the emerging stage. And not only do you know it, but you're good at it. And that's the difference in elevating. The opportunities here get a little bit more nuanced. This is where you need to start finding sponsorship to support your current and long-term career strategy, improving your communication skills with key stakeholders and team members, and becoming a people leader is most likely in this area. And you need to learn how to motivate and inspire others to achieve department and company objectives. For me, this was really in my later career development jobs and also right when I was moving back into corporate America. In this time, it's really key that you're able to share a strategic vision. We talk about executive presence in another episode this season, and talking about your vision is how you get buy-in. It's how you get others to come along the journey with you. When you've mastered your role, you know how to essentially do it their way. This is when you can start to do it your way, because you want to test things. You have more influence, more connection. You may be building bigger teams. The vision here is really, really key. So when you're thinking about your opportunities, one of the questions I ask my clients here is when they're in roles they know they want to grow in, or they're getting into their first role where they're like, okay, this is my first like big girl or big boy job, whatever that job is. I ask, what is the legacy that you want to leave? What is the stamp that when you leave this job, they're going to say, when I was here, you know, so-and-so did this. What is the thing that's going to be the thing your boss talks about years after you left? We're talking about legacy once we get into the elevating area. Next up, we have expanding. And this, I say, could be 5 years to a lifetime in tenure. So again, you'll see some nuances here based upon how fast you grow. For me, and for some of my clients who are high achievers, I generally changed roles and moved into something new every 2 to 3 years. Some folks, depending upon the job you have, you may need to stay in your job 3, 4, 5 years before moving. Not every role you have will be a role where you need to move and groove every year, every 2 years. There are jobs that are going to take time to fine tune and master, and that time is needed. So again, you need to understand your industry, and more than your industry, understand your company and understand the job you have. In my last role in corporate America, it was not a role that I was going to master in 2 years. By no means. And it's not because I wasn't excited or I didn't want to push the company to promote me. If I got promoted, I would have wanted to get promoted with the same title based upon the work that I had, not into a new job completely different, because the job I had literally was going to take 3 to 5 years in order to really master and get to be a well-oiled machine. And I think many times when we think about growing our careers, we want the title, we want the move, but we don't necessarily want to put the time in to master it. But there's so many different strategies we can talk about, and when it comes to salary negotiation and all of that. But I think it's important to understand where you are. So when we come to expanding, again, this could be 5 years to a lifetime, depending upon where you're coming in. And generally, I'd say 6 to 12 years at least in your defined role or industry, and you're currently leading a department or team. The mindset here, especially when you first get into it, you may feel like a fish out of water. As a new leader, there's so many new responsibilities. And this is where I see a lot of folks talking about code switching, especially for younger professionals who've excelled faster. I know in my career, I got to a point where I felt like I was really young and I was working with a lot of people who were a bit older than me. And sometimes that can be intimidating when you're someone who's expedited your growth, which is great, super exciting, but that also comes with its own nuances. The opportunities here are setting a larger vision that impacts the team, department, or the company. So you're no longer just thinking about you and your team. You know how you're broader body of work connects to how the organization works. How does your team help the larger company make money? When you start making decisions and you're thinking about the company's profitability and the impact, this is when you know that you are definitely in the expanding arena. Positioning yourself as a leader and updating the next phase of your career strategy. If you're not already in executive roles, you're getting ready for that. And for me, this was definitely my last job in career services and my global director role when I worked in a Fortune 100 company in financial services. My role connected to the company at large. It had global impact. And I felt like a fish out of water most days, because when things happened, it was no longer in this safe bucket that I was able to control anymore. It had so much more impact, so much more influence. And that can be really intimidating when you get to this area, which is why mentorship and sponsorship can be so key. And also just building a network of folks who are where you are, so you have that community and assistance in making your decisions every single day. Last but not least is 5, and I don't really say much about this, but this is an empowering. This is when you're giving the authority or you have the power to do something. And this is where our executive leaders are. And at that phase in the game, the world is generally your oyster, because you are literally leading the charge and the buck stops with you. So the key ones I want to talk about today, or that I already shared with you today, are the establishing, which is that 1 to 3 years right out of college. We have the emerging, the 2 to 5 years tenure outside of college, where you're really kind of focusing on growing. Elevating, which is 4 to 10 years tenure. And then we have the expanding, which is really when you are out in the world, you are moving and grooving, and it's about setting that vision as a leader. I want you to look at all of your experiences as different tools that you are adding to your own career toolkit. When I had my first apartment, I gave an analogy in another one about adding tools. First you had a Allen key for your IKEA furniture, and then you had a screwdriver and then a hammer. We want to take all of these tools, all of these skills that you've gained, whether you feel like they're related or not related, and be able to apply them to attack the gaps to move you to the next area of your career. As you grow, you're applying these tools over and over and over again. And you can't jump steps. Many times we think that we're like, okay, well, maybe I'm right out of college, but I really want to have that job where I'm making close to $200K a year leading a team. What I tell my clients, even though they may not want to hear it, you don't want to jump that fast. When you jump that fast and you're a fish out of water who does not have the skill sets in your toolbox to attack the problems that you have in front of you, that's a very scary place to be. Don't be afraid to ride the train and take every stop. Yes, you can skip in some areas, maybe skip industries. Yes, there's things that you can learn to skip the line. However, make sure that you are setting yourself up for success and mastering each step along the way. And maybe you don't need 2 years to master it. Maybe you can do it faster than most. I know I definitely did, but let's not rush it too much. When you're thinking about your gaps, your goal is that you are in a job where you are happy, you feel skilled, you are operating in your strengths, and you are prepared and challenged at the same exact time. Let me know if you have any more questions about attacking your gaps in the workplace. And with that, may your next move be your very best move.